Thank you, Anne. If nothing else, writing this book has kindled a friendship with Ann Patchett, which is so amazing, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much to the Nashville Public Library and to Parnassus and to all of you for showing up tonight. I'm from New York, and I never knew that Nashville would feel like home, but it does. And I have so many friends in this audience. I have family in this audience. I have friends who feel like family. I have people that knew my mom and people who were angels to us in our time of need when it was really, really hard. So thank you all so much for being here. This book is a love letter to my mom, really, ultimately. And as I said, I grew up in New York, so a lot of you don't know what my childhood was like. It was great. It was quirky and wonderful. My dad's here, so it's his fault. It was a wonderful childhood. I'm so glad you're here, Dad. But I thought I would read to you a little bit, just to kick us off, a little bit from the book about what it was like for me growing up in New York with my brother Jay, who's also here, and yay, and my sister Ashley. She's not here. Let's forget about her. She was busy. Dad's freelance sales were barely enough to support a wife and 3 kids in the 70s. For years, we bought groceries on sale and got our shoes 2 sizes too big so we could grow into them. The house became chaotic. Stacks of old newspapers, letters, and unfinished to-do lists piled up on the floors and in corners, enough to become end tables, topped off with a tissue box or an old cup of coffee. We all tried to pitch in at home, doing dishes and laundry and trying to keep track of our pets, hamsters, fish, a parakeet, guinea pigs, mice, and a couple of snakes over the years. But my parents could only take so much of this help from their 3 small children. Sometimes my mother's stoic facade cracked and she buckled under the strain of being a homemaker and raising her brood. I can hear her voice when she was stressed. She sounded like a crow, cawing at us to clean our rooms, tie our shoes, get in the car, and stop fighting about who sits where. We were often late for something. My father's job was to stay calm and put out emotional fires or mediate between my mother and us. He convened family meetings, usually after Mom had already hit her breaking point. He gathered us at the kitchen table where my mother sat with her arms crossed, her face red from crying. Nobody's very happy right now, he would say, so let's go around the table and each talk about our needs. At the first of these sessions, I got confused. I thought, we're going to talk about our knees? But the meetings usually comforted Mom, and with our apologies and promises to chip in more, she quickly recovered. Often, my parents threw some of the clutter into the laundry room or closets and invited people over. It was in front of these dear family friends that I first got my acting chops. I directed Jay and myself in our simple original productions, musicals usually, meaning 1 or 2 songs and a few lines of dialogue. Following an afternoon of rehearsals, we felt confident enough to charge our parents' guests a nickel to see the show. On a good night, we could make more than 50 cents. My mother supported our business acumen and taught us about money at an early age. Unlike the other moms I knew, she insisted that we pay her back for all supplies when we built a lemonade stand outside our house. There were no freebies. On the other hand, once a year, Mom redefined that word. My parents splurged on a special date at a nearby clam bake, an annual all-you-can-eat buffet. Without apologies, my mother took a plastic-lined purse she'd bought, especially for the occasion, and went through the line at least twice, first filling a plate or 2 for herself, and then stuffing her bag full of whole lobsters, pieces of cake, and jam-filled cookies to bring home to her delighted children. When night came at our house and everyone had put on their pajamas and brushed their teeth, my mother relaxed and celebrated, reclining against her worn blue corduroy throne pillow beside a generous splash of Heaven Hill bourbon on ice in a wine glass. I rested my head on my mother's lap and she scratched my back, as she read to me The Velveteen Rabbit, Charlotte's Web, or A Wrinkle in Time, acting out characters' voices and conveying all the passion of the story. She paused as she turned each page to take a sip. I can still hear the clink of the cubes and her happy sigh, and then she kept reading. Though she felt overwhelmed at times, Mom bounced back from all of the challenging moments of my childhood with exuberance and strength. Ultimately, I think she would have said being a mother was the most rewarding job she had ever had. Thank you. Well, my mom was diagnosed in 2005 with a rare degenerative brain disease, a rare form of dementia called primary progressive aphasia. And actually, the first sign that we got that something was off with her was at my wedding. She got up, well, first of all, backing up a little bit, she was not a huge fan of Brad Paisley, which obviously was dementia. And that's a chapter in the book, so I'll leave that to, you can buy the book and read about that. But at the wedding, she threw kind of a fit on the day of the wedding, and so at the last minute, we said, okay, Mom, she wanted to be a part of the ceremony, so we said, all right, here's this Bible passage, you can read this. And she got up, and my mom was someone that was used to speaking in front of people, very smart, a journalist for many years, and she kind of choked and wasn't able to get through the passage. Well, at the time, we thought, I'm the first to get married. She's not a fan, whatever. She's stressed out. It's a big day. We kind of wrote it off. But in the following 2 years, the decline was much more pronounced. And after many tests and many doctors, we came to a diagnosis. She was working at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's research at the time. My mom was an amazing fundraiser. She could ask people for millions of dollars with a straight face, and she would get it. She was phenomenal. And Michael J. Fox wrote the foreword for this book, and I'm so grateful to him for it. I think he did a phenomenal job. Michael was someone that my mom really looked up to, and she really believed in what he was doing and the way that he had used his story and his crisis for good and to raise money for Parkinson's, to put Parkinson's on the map in a way that it hadn't been before. And I think about that a lot now because, of course, I don't have my mom's blessing to write this book. For years, from diagnosis on, for years, she did not want us to talk about it. And I think that happens to a lot of families that are facing a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. She was embarrassed. She had always been very smart, and she was worried that people would think she wasn't anymore. I think there was an irrational part of her that felt like it was her fault. So she asked us to keep it a secret. And I think, unfortunately, we missed out on a lot of resources that we could have gotten. We missed out on learning about the Alzheimer's Association. We missed out on just connection with friends that could have helped support us. My dad missed out on, he was the primary caregiver, and we didn't know how to properly support him. So she had to retire from the Fox Foundation and she was told to go home and become a grandmother. She didn't know what that would mean. None of us did. I was pregnant with my first child, Huck, when we found out about the diagnosis. And so I just want to read to you a little bit about what happened after I had children, because as her symptoms progressed, something surprising happened, and that was that I was caught between being a mom of young children and beginning to parent my own parents. And unfortunately, something we didn't see coming was that I was put in the position of having to protect my children from my mother. So I wanted to read you a little bit about that. I asked my parents to wait a whole month before visiting from New York. I needed time to acclimate to juggling 2 children. And I had even less confidence than last time about Mom's ability to help, given her decline. Actually, it was more than that. I had real concerns for Jasper's safety. My fears turned out to be warranted. Once my parents arrived, Mom insisted on holding him. That was fine with me, as long as we were sitting together on the couch. I was always a stickler for hand washing, but When Mom forgot the soap, wet her hands a little, and wiped them on the butt of her pants, I let it slide. Thank goodness Jasper was the second child. One day during my parents' visit, I was getting my hair and makeup done in the living room for an event that evening. Jasper was sleeping in his little Moses basket nearby, and Mom was hanging out with us. Dad had disappeared. I was happy to be allowing him a break. While chatting with Robin, the makeup artist, I hadn't noticed that Jasper had quietly awakened. So I was startled to see my mother carrying him in her arms. Her grip was awkward. Jasper's blanket was askew, falling off in a long train toward the floor. She could easily have tripped over it. I wanted to hop out of the chair and snatch him away, but I was afraid to offend her. In that moment, I made a conscious decision to let her be grandma. In turn, letting myself buy into the fantasy that just for a minute, everything was normal. Then I saw Jasper's head slipping out of my mother's arms as he arched backward. She caught his legs and was able to stop his fall a few inches before he hit the floor. She held him there by his feet, dangling upside down. I gasped, jumped out of my chair, and grabbed him. "Oh my God," I exclaimed. I was furious, on the verge of yelling at her. Her face flushed with embarrassment and, to my surprise, anger at me. She was enraged that I had snatched the baby out of her arms and humiliated by my reaction. It was Jasper's fault, not mine, she tried to tell me in broken sentences. As she continued rambling, I sensed how upset she was. I fought to stay calm. "No big deal," I said, but I was shaking and my heart was racing. I clutched Jasper tightly to me. As I walked back to my seat, I saw the horrified expression on Robin's face. How could I have let that happen? I thought. Mom went into the bathroom, probably to cry. I turned to Robin and whispered, "Did you see that?" "Yes," she said, equally concerned. We were afraid to say anything else. Mom would be able to hear, and I already knew that my father and I would be dealing with her shame and fury for at least the rest of the day. I didn't bring it up with Brad at the time. I didn't want to worry him, but it felt as if the ground had turned to slippery ice and I was struggling to get my balance. I realized with certainty that my most important job was to protect my children from their failing grandmother, a challenge I had never expected to have. What else could go wrong? My mind scrolled through as many disaster scenarios as I could imagine. What was once a safe cabin turned into a terrifying danger zone. As my mind filled in the blanks, I imagined my babies tumbling from my mother's arms and down the stairs, off the balcony, or out a window. What if she tried to feed them Legos instead of peas? What if she picked them up by the neck? That almost happened later, but I was there to stop her. Suddenly, nothing was beyond the realm of possibility. I realized that another adult and I would have to be home with my boys anytime my mother was there in case of emergency. We would have to watch my mother and kids constantly and know how to steer Mom away from potentially dangerous situations. Ideally, the double team arrangement had to be set up discreetly to protect my mother from a catastrophic emotional crash if she found out about it. My mind spun out of control, wondering what else I could be missing. My parents' departure could not have come soon enough. Thank you. It got a little bit worse before it got better. We put her into long-term care in 2012 because what started as problems with speech and behavior escalated, and she did need, within 5 to 7 years after diagnosis, she needed full-time care. And we were really afraid we were going to lose my father before we even lost my mom. There was aggression, there was incontinence, and on one of the hardest days of my family's life, we had to put her into long-term care, and that's where she is now. But I called this book Where the Light Gets In because, honestly, there have been so many blessings in this journey. And my dad's girlfriend, she's a chapter in the book, my dad's girlfriend, Nancy, gave me a wonderful quote from a Leonard Cohen song called Anthem. "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And I just thought it was amazing and beautiful, and it became my anthem as I wrote this book. one of the amazing blessings, I thought that my mom would not have a relationship with my son Huck. And they had a wonderful relationship. One of the many, the hard thing that she couldn't speak for more than a word at a time was actually perfect for a toddler. And, she was uninhibited in a way that she'd never had been before. She'd always been very aware of etiquette, and that kind of went out the window. And that was perfect for a toddler. And they lay on the floor, and they played for hours, and it was wonderful to see the joy between them. She's still my teacher now. She teaches me about living in the moment, because my mom's not concerned about the past or the future. And I learn about that when I'm with her. She's taught me how to love the person in front of me that's not the person I expected and not the person I ever knew, but she's changed, and I have learned to love her the way she is, and that's a beautiful lesson. Writing this book was very uncomfortable at times and very challenging, but I have learned through writing it and through examining this story in this way to become comfortable with what's uncomfortable, to become used to the feeling of being uncomfortable. And I still take that lesson with me every day. So I'd love to open it up to questions. If anybody has any, I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if any of you are living with anything like this or any long-term illness or family dynamic changes, but anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I lost my dad 3 years ago to Alzheimer's and dementia. And I just wondered, do you worry about it being hereditary?
Yeah, sure. I do. I think about it every day. Sorry? Oh, what's the question? She asked if I worry about it. If it, it may or may not be hereditary. When my mom was diagnosed, they said it's probably not hereditary, and since then they've said, well, it could be. Great. That's why I want to fight to find a cure. But I think everyone in our family thought about it. Whenever we couldn't come up with a word, when, we got confused, forgot the keys, The difference was that my mom had increasing difficulties over a number of years, and it was interfering with her work and her life. The best thing I can do, though, is to be clear about what my wishes are and to be clear what I want my family to do, which is to live their lives and to look after me, but know that I believe things aren't always as they seem. And, that's one thing I wish my mom had done, because we weren't allowed to talk about it. She didn't want to talk about it. She never wrote down her wishes for us. And we were left struggling, and I think we had a lot of guilt that we wouldn't have had if she had just let us off the hook. So I would recommend that to everybody, whether or not you're in this situation, but just write down a couple sentences about what you'd like. Thank you for the question. Yes?
My dad is from temporal lobe dementia, and it's progressively gotten worse. Did you have, and one of the first signs was hoarding, did you have trouble with your mom?
My mom was always a hoarder, so that's hard to say. Aphasia, primary progressive aphasia is a frontal temporal lobe disorder too. She didn't, she was always, honestly, that's what she always did. What we saw in her first was a problem with speech and some behavioral issues. Yes?
And your siblings dealt with this. When you have a child, their progression. They're going to crawl, they're going to walk, they're going to speak.
Right.
When you're going back down the ladder, it's hard to know where they are, and that they're your parents, and you have to show them a certain amount of respect.
Exactly.
They don't make good decisions.
Right. That was very challenging, and we made a lot of mistakes, and it wasn't pretty. Unfortunately, she, for example, drove for a lot longer than she should have, and I think that was because of our fear of making her mad, we wanted to protect her pride. At what expense? We're just so lucky that there wasn't a horrible accident. She did have an accident where she barreled down the aisle of a parking lot and knocked a few cars. But I thank God there wasn't a child there, So what I like to tell people to do is go to the Alzheimer's Association. That's a resource we didn't tap into. They have a whole page on how to get the car keys away. We should have enlisted professional help. We should have gotten a doctor's note to say, you cannot, it's illegal, you know?
We were lucky my dad finally he turned over the keys and let us.
Well, that's great. Our car finally died. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
Okay, so my questions pertain to your writing process. So as you told a personal story, how did you decide what to share and what not to share? As well as at what point did you seek outside guidance helping you write or tell your story?
Yeah, that's a good question. She asked how I wrote my story, what the process was like. I had a lot of support. First of all, I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't have the support of my entire family, and I leaned on them heavily. My sister's memories, my brother's memories, my father's memories and records and diary and journal entries. And I have a fantastic editor, Amanda Patton, who's here, and she was a great resource. And my father was a great resource. He was also an editor for years. So I would go in a room, climb the mountain, write what I was going to write, let it be bad, try to refine it. Then I would send it, usually to my dad. He would send it back, refine, and then we'd send it on to Amanda. So I felt very supported. I did a lot of it by myself, but then had a lot of help to make sure it was in order. Yes?
I have an article like sometimes forgetful to the point where she will actually losing a step. Yeah, your mother actually do that, blame people whenever she lost something?
He asked if my mom blamed other people when she lost things. That's your question, right? Yeah. She had a lot of I think she do. She would tend to. It wasn't primarily that she was losing things necessarily. She was losing words. But yeah, she did lash out at other people and blame. I think it was a defensive reaction. And there was confusion about why she didn't remember certain things or words or memories. And that did progress as her disease progressed. Yeah. Yes?
How are your children dealing with it now? How do you deal with your children, and do they still get to see your mom?
Yes, they do. And in fact, that was another surprise. I was concerned about taking my kids to see my mom once she was in the home because I thought they would be devastated because I was devastated. And what I learned was that they, like my mother, were living in the moment. And hey, she's just weird. She's kooky. She's fun, They had a ball, and this person's screaming over there. Isn't that funny? And this person's singing, wow. And they went away, and it just rolled off their back. They love visiting her. And also understand that some days she's happy, some days she's not, some days she's responsive, and some days not. And, they've been okay with that. Yes, anyone else? Yes?
How often do you get to see her?
She's in New York, so every time I go home, I try to see her, which is probably about every 8 weeks, sometimes more, sometimes less. I just saw her 2 weeks ago, and I showed her the book, and we had a good little visit. She was actually really responsive in a way that she hadn't been in a while, and it was cool. And she looked at it, and I told her that I thought she was going to help a lot of people. And I haven't heard her speak in a year and a half or so, maybe a year. I haven't heard her say anything. And she just looked at the book, and I said, "You're going to help a lot of people." And she said, "I am," like that. I thought that was really cool. Yes?
Now that she's in the home, does she pack up and her things like she's afraid that someone's going to take them? My sister, who's 82, is in this situation, and every little while she packs up everything in shopping bags and her phone, her clock, her cell phone, her charger, and it's like she'll call and say, "Well, you know that I'm in Dixon," and we're, "Oh, really?" oh yes, and you've got to come and get me. And this will pass, and then she will remember. She will remember telling me this, and she'll remember packing up all the stuff.
Does she have Alzheimer's?
Dementia, a vascular dementia, which I think she just throws a plot, and then she comes back to semi-normal.
Yeah.
But, it's hard for her now to kind of connect in the conversation to keep up a little
Right.
bit. But she still is talking and is very verbal.
Right.
But this sense of moving and that this is not where she's supposed to be.
Yeah. It sounds like a different type of dementia from what my mother has, because she's nonverbal now, mostly, in a wheelchair, doesn't do anything for herself. But, I mean, my husband's grandmother has Alzheimer's, and she sounds similar to that, where she's been, living with it for a really long time, and is very highly functioning in a lot of ways, but gets confused, and some days remembers people, and some days doesn't, and, a lot of times is delightful. And my mom is just sort of mostly shut down. She kind of communicates emotionally, is aware if there's emotion, good or bad, or she'll have like flashes of happy or sad, or, but pretty different reactions. Yes?
Yes. My question is, I have an aunt, and her husband has been passed away, and she still acts like he's alive, and she cannot get over that. So would she probably be the rest of that way for the rest of her life?
Well, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. Has she been to a doctor?
Well, right now she's in one of those assisted living places.
Yeah. That sounds like the right place for her to be. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes?
So for about the past year or so, my grandmother has been exhibiting all the classic early warning signs of dementia. My mom, my aunt, they talked about it among themselves, and every time they bring it up to my grandfather, he just skirts around it. He won't talk about it. What advice would you have for the parents or the grandchildren of someone who could possibly be suffering? How to approach the subject and talk about it as a family?
What a great question. Yeah. I recently read a book by Atul Gawande, Being Mortal, and it's a wonderful resource. And I would suggest you get that book. He talks a lot about the questions you should ask and how to approach those conversations and how important it is to have them. Again, the Alzheimer's Association website is a great resource with lots of questions to ask. But I understand the resistance, and I know it's hard to have those conversations because we tried in many different roundabout ways, and if we were too direct, it would send her off on a tailspin, I understand. Yeah, I mean, you got to do the best you can, and for a long time we were in survivor mode, and it's like, well, if they're not going to do it, okay, what can we do? But I will say, as much as possible, do the best you can, and then let go of guilt and know that you've done the best you can. And there really isn't a pretty way to go through it sometimes, and you'll have to make the decisions for yourself if they won't give you guidance, Yes.
So this is not to distract from the conversation about dementia and PPA, but I liked the book because I thought that it dealt with questions about how hard it was and about the questions you have for God in a direct way. And I'm going through dealing with breast cancer right now, so something totally different, but like lots of good Episcopalians, I think I never really questioned my faith until there was something to question. Mm-hmm. And I don't blame God for me being sick, but I don't feel like I know how to get through it. Mm-hmm. And I also don't feel entitled to deprive other people of whatever comfort they get from saying God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or
right.
This too shall pass, or whatever else it is. But I'm just having trouble feeling that way and feeling compassionate. I mean, I feel like God does give us more than we can handle sometimes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always pass.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things. And I thought the chapter when you were talking about your cousin dying particularly addressed that. And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Thank you for your honesty and that question. It's a great question, and it's something that I struggle with still. Dementia has robbed my mom of her personality. And so the essence of who she is and the person that I love and that sparkle and that joy has gone away. And so I spent a lot of time wondering, well, where did it go? Where is that soul that I've always believed is in a person when I can't see it at all? And there's a moment I write about in the book where she was having a Reiki session on hospice. And the Reiki therapist came out into the hallway after a session, and my dad asked how it went, and she said, I don't know, it's almost as if she doesn't have a soul. And she, right? Horrible. She regretted it. Not enough. But the truth was I understood why she said that. Because my mom, they say the eyes are the window to the soul, and my mom's eyes were vacant. But in one of the darkest moments of this story, when my cousin died, I felt like we were dealing with this crisis with my mom, and I knew that was the crisis I was dealing with, was my mom, and that was awful and really hard, and that's what all our attention was focused on, and then all of a sudden my cousin passed away in 10 days from a strep infection, this freak accident. And I thought, I just thought, well, God, where are you? What is going on? And it was at one of my darkest moments when I walked out of the hospital room and down the hall and saw a sign for the chapel, in the hospital chapel. And I walked in the room and opened the door, and there is a woman kneeling by the cross in the corner of the room, and she turns and looks at me, and a smile spreads across her face. And it was like an angel. It was like I had walked in the room and there was this angel. And she said, hi. Like she was waiting for me. And I said, hi. And I had tears running down my face. And she said, do you want me to pray with you? And I said, yes. And she said, what happened? I said, my cousin died. She said, what's his name? Stephen. Okay. And we were holding hands on the floor of this chapel. And suddenly we weren't strangers anymore. And it felt like a miracle. And it restored my faith for the moment. It restored it. And there's some days that I lose it again, and I remember moments like that. And in the book, I write about God winks, which to me are God's way of saying I'm still here. And I do believe that. I believe that God is still here, even when I can't always sense him, And that's been one of the beautiful surprises of this journey for me. And I hope that you can find that too. Yes. Oh, sorry, I was looking right here. Sorry.
Thanks so much for being here and talking about this whole subject. My grandfather passed away and had been dealing with Alzheimer's for quite some time, and but he died at 89. I got to see him before he died, which I was really grateful. But I was just wondering about just you and Brad, just as a spouse. My grandma talks about her situation, but just kind of talk a little bit about him being there with you. How did he help you through it?
Yeah. Brad's been a trooper. He's been through a lot. It's hard to take care of someone who's going through something as emotionally draining as my family has been, and he's been amazing. He's primarily supported me through humor, and I'm grateful for that. He can pretty much find a joke in anything. He's also been there for me, just on days when I just need to cry, and it's better if he doesn't say anything, and he can just hold me and let me cry. He's a huge, huge support in our family. Yeah. Yes. Yes, you.
My father had Alzheimer's and dementia for about 15 years. And my husband died right when I had my daughter in 1994. And that's when my father got diagnosed. So I was raising this baby alone, without my husband who had brain cancer, and my father having dementia and Alzheimer's. A few years prior to that, my mother committed suicide. And so I was dealing with having to try and be my father's advocate and raise my child, who's now graduating from college next week. And I was wondering if your mom ever gets confused on who you are, because my dad would think I was my mother quite a bit. And then they got married in 1955, so they bickered a lot, the old school marriage, So he kept thinking I was her, would call me by her name, Gail, and then would get angry and mention something I had no idea what he was talking about. How do you handle something like that? Do you act like you are the person, or?
Yeah, my advice is to go along with what they're saying. Say, yeah, you're right. There's not really a point, in my opinion, to talk them out of it, because that might just cause more conflict.
You're completely right. He passed away, but I noticed that did work better, to just kind of nod and yes, okay, right. You're right.
Yeah. We met on an airplane. I remember you.
And I promised you I'd be here.
Thank you for being here. Anyone else? Yes.
I want to piggyback on the question about Brad. Since you're from you're in a musical family, I've done a reasonable amount of study of music and its effects, particularly personal music.
Yes.
Have you or anyone else attempted to use anything like music and memory therapy?
Yes. That's a great question. And yes, music has been so effective in just lightening her mood. For years, that was a great way to cheer her up or take her out of some spiral if she was spiraling down. Did you see the movie Alive Inside? That was the documentary. Oh, phenomenal. Really interesting stuff. And we also found that music therapy was a very helpful way to communicate with her. So for a long time, she would just make sounds like ba, 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 like agonizing sounds. If we matched the sound, she felt heard. And then once there was that connection, my dad taught me how to do it, then you could, sigh and help bring her down. And she felt heard, and then you could both let go. So that was a really cool technique, and I would definitely recommend that to anybody. The last time I saw her, I tried it again and held up Welcome to the Future, one of Brad's songs. See if she's a fan now. And she is. But I chose that song because she was in the video. She was in the video for Welcome to the Future, and it was like a big moment in our lives when that song came out, and there was a lot of excitement around that, and she was coherent enough to remember that at the time, so I wondered if that would trigger a memory, and I put it on, and she went, oh yeah, which was big. That's a big reaction, so that was great. So it's still effective depending on the day, yeah. And then behind, yes.
I was wondering about your interactions with healthcare professionals, if you had any positive or negative ones. I'm getting ready to graduate pharmacy school in 3 weeks, and so I'll be working at an independent pharmacy, and that's one thing I really want to be as a strong advocate for my patients and their families, and just really let them know that if they need anything, I will be there for them.
Oh, that's
so I was
great.
wondering if you had any advice on just any lessons you had learned with dealing with healthcare professionals, what you wish they would have done or wouldn't have said or anything.
Gosh, that's such a great question. I feel like that's a question for my father. Do you want to answer that at all? Or my dad, what my father has done in my mom's home is really gotten to know the staff. And I think that's made a huge difference for my mother's care, because he loves them, they love him, they love our family, they know our family. And I think having that personal connection makes a huge difference. There's a picture wall up of my mom of what she cared about, what she loved, and they know that. So they feel like they know her. Because so often you're dealing with a different personality or aggression or, other stuff. So it really helps to paint a picture and remember that this is who this person is. Is there anything specific that I should say in terms of advice?
About Michelin and that experience?
We had kind of a difficult experience when we got the diagnosis, and I think it was possibly because the doctor was seeing us in a clinical way, and we went from going to him for help to suddenly feeling like my mother was the lab rat, that he needed her. And that was a horrible feeling because he didn't have any advice for us. He just wanted information so he could study her because maybe one day he would have advice. But we left feeling awful. He didn't have a great bedside manner, and I think it was because he wasn't looking at this life and this family that was gathered in this room with, for hope, and instead, just got something clinical. Yes?
Can you talk about money? Not in terms of your experience, but I feel like we're in this room with so many people who are suffering from the effects of dementia and Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. We're living longer and longer. More and more people are getting dementia. How are we going to pay for it? And what do we need to do politically to help our families in the future?
Thank you. That is a great question. Dementia is by far more expensive than heart disease or cancer in the last 5 years of life because of the 24-hour care needs. It is an extremely expensive disease. And it's also on the rise, and women in their 60s are almost twice as likely to get dementia than they are breast cancer. And that's a stat that people don't know, people don't talk about. But I was speaking at the Alzheimer's Forum on April 5th in D.C. The night before, 1,200 people were gathered. Congressmen, patients, family, caregivers were going to the Hill to lobby for more funding. President Obama just signed more legislation to allow for more funding for Alzheimer's research. They have a goal to delay onset by 5 years by 2025. So that's what they're going for, and I feel like at least it's a start. If they can delay onset by 5 years, they will save enormous amounts of money. Billions? Millions? How many? How much?
42% of the cost.
42% of the costs if they delay it for 5 years, which is a big deal. So, talk about it. Write your congressman and make it an issue. I mean, the NFL players are wearing pink for breast cancer, which I think is awesome. How cool is that? Guys in the rodeo are wearing pink button-down shirts on the rodeo because they want to support breast cancer. There was a time when people couldn't talk about breast cancer. You couldn't talk about cancer at all, right? And now people are talking about it, and there's walks and there's fundraisers, and that's fantastic. And I want to see that happen for dementia. I want to see people wearing purple. I got my purple hair, and I got pink, too. I'm for both, yes.
How do you, I guess just in terms of political action, I think one thing that's harder, because I deal with this to some extent with my dad, that's harder with dementia and Alzheimer's and aging is how do you separate the funding, how can you politically make an impact in a way that distinguishes between effecting change in Alzheimer's and dementia versus what people think of as normal aging? I think it's difficult for people to discern.
That's a great question, because it is very common. Once you're older, you're probably going to get some form of dementia the older you get.
But it's not a foregone conclusion, and politically it seems like that gets swept up in everyone.
Right, and I don't know if the answer is political. Probably not. But it can't hurt to also go that route, What I've found is that organizations are starting to work together in great ways. And the Alzheimer's Association is actually working with the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's. Because if they find inroads in Parkinson's, they will in Alzheimer's, and they can work together. And I'd like to see more of that, Yes?
One of the things that I've found in working with an aging population
and trying to raise money to support that group is that our whole culture looks at aging with a really negative light. When you are talking about affecting the lives of children for the whole rest of their lives, people rush to give money. But when you're talking about money for seniors and things that will seniors struggling with disease, it's just not a sexy sell.
Right.
And it is so difficult. So everybody in this room is here probably because they are, first of all, you wrote a wonderful book.
Thank you.
And we all probably are dealing with this on one level or another, but just the more that it's talked about and brought to the fore, and older lives are revered.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. 100%. Thank you. Is that about it? Oh, yes?
As I said, I lost my father, and at the time of losing him, he'd already had about 3.5 years of having been diagnosed with Alzheimer's that soon was turning into dementia, just based on the extreme change in his behavior. And it was getting to the point where my mother just couldn't handle him on his own, and as most people, at-home care is extremely expensive. But being from a Hispanic culture, it's just frowned upon. You don't put your people, in any kind of senior assisted care. My mother fought it for a long time. And I say thankfully, he passed away before. He passed away literally 2 days before he was going to die. The thing for me that I deal with is slight guilt of feeling thankful. Not only that we didn't have to put him in there, but also that I never got to the place where he didn't know who I was. That he never looked at me, his only daughter, and didn't know me. I mean, his final act was to literally look at my mother and pucker up his lips for a kiss before we had to give him morphine to help him with pain because he was suffering kidney failure. For me, when I think about that, I can't help but look at others and go, like yourself, who you're still dealing with it. Is there a point that you think to yourself, I don't want to go past that, I just don't want to see her past that?
Yeah, I mean, that already happened. Yeah. And, going back to what you said about putting her in a home, that was something that we really struggled with. And I think we waited a couple of years longer than we should have. And as I said, we were terrified we were going to lose my dad before we lost my mom. He thought he was going to have a heart attack. He thought he was having a heart attack one day, and it wasn't, thank goodness. But I understand that. And that was one of our family's hardest days, was when we had to actually put her in the home. That was awful. But 2 weeks later, when she'd adjusted, she loved it. She was always a people person. And she wasn't happy in my house, my parents' house with my dad alone. They were both angry, both dying slowly. And there was no point to that. But when she got to the home, they had music and tons of people. And once she adapted, she was fine. So I think making a blanket statement like that, that's something we did. We promised, you'll never have to leave. My dad promised, you'll never have to leave the home. And then he regretted that later. So, but that makes sense. It appeased her in the moment. So he's learned to forgive himself for saying that. And ultimately, that wasn't what was best. And it's different for everybody.
Well, for us, it was also hard because my father was, seriously could not be without my mother.
Yeah.
He'd follow her around the house like a puppy.
Right.
I mean, it was, so that was, for her, that was her biggest issue. What if that man's going to die without, if I'm not next to him?
Right.
And that was her own, thing. But that's why I say it's, I believe in God having, his own way of doing things when he needs to. And
right.
He didn't, so we wouldn't have to suffer another way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. one last question? Yes.
I took care of my mom for a couple of years. Her illness lasted about 5 years, and my sister helped too. So, but I noticed there was a point where my mom started to fall, and that brought on all sorts of other questions and ways I had to manage what was going on with her. I was living with her, and among everything else you got to deal with. But the falling was really a stressful part to me. She actually fell in a rose bush once. I had to rush out to work, being self-employed, and got back as soon as I could. And so she crawled herself back into the house, and there's a blood trail behind her. I was like, oh my God, what a mess. But did your family go through that, where there was that period where suddenly the falling came in, and then how did you handle that?
Definitely. That was a big part of it. There were falls, there were accidents, dropping glasses, dropping a glass. I was there with my son once, and she dropped a glass and sliced her wrist open and had to go to the hospital. Cracks on the sidewalk, she'd trip and fall, and they were going to the ER all the time. I think that's really common. My parents lived in a house with a staircase that was like a spiral, and I was always terrified that they were both going to go plummeting down. And at the end, right before she went in, my dad would just sit at the top of the stairs like a baby gate. That was like the only way to keep her from charging down the stairs. And, fortunately, they didn't ever fall down the stairs, the two of them together, like I thought they would. Anyway, thank you guys. What a great discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions.